Yes. If Seth, we're going live. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are live on Facebook. We're going to give people a few moments to join. We are now live on YouTube as well. And we're now going to share this on our various Facebook channels. See. Give everyone a moment to join.
Mute.
What?
Mute.
Mute us.
I'll mute you. Don't worry.
With pleasure.
Be careful what you ask for.
I'm going to mute you, Seth, in a minute. Sure. Good evening, Mary. We're going to just share. Good evening, Lodi. We're going to be. We're going to share. Oh, there's Marjorie. Let me let her in. We're going to share it on our social media platforms, and we will get rolling here. Many sitting outside, so I'm not sure.
He was on the couch.
That's what I mean. I'm saying he's not in class. Okay.
Is he in your office staring at the screen?
No, he's on the couch.
Oh.
My office is locked. We are going to get started in about 10 seconds. Just good evening, Doug. One more channel to share it on, and we will be set. And gegangen. Oh, Noah wants to get in. Very good. Okay, we are on all our channels. And good evening, Danielle. Good evening, Noah. It is Parshas Chaye Sarah. Good evening, Kayla Gittel. Beautiful to see all the neshamas here. We are in the fifth portion of the book of Genesis in Chaye Sarah. It talks about the passing of Sarah. And then after Sarah's passing and after her burial, there's a statement in chapter 24, verse 1. So if you're using the Life Chumash, it's on page 127. And it says, Abraham was old, Abraham zaken, ba bayomim. He was still immersed in daily life, and God blessed Abraham with everything. That's a simple translation of the verse. Page 127, verse 1 of chapter 24. That Abraham was old and immersed in daily life, ba bayomim. First of all, Abraham passes away at the end of this week's Torah portion. He's 175 years old. Right? When he gave birth last week to Isaac, he was 100. When he took Isaac to the Akedah, Isaac was close to 40 years old, which means Abraham was about 140 years old. So now when he's, Ba Bayomim, suddenly now you're going to say that he's getting old? Abraham was old. Congratulations. Like, we didn't know that. I mean, it's pretty clear that he was old. Especially if you look at the language, Zaken, he's old, and Ba Bayomim, he was coming of days. That's the literal translation. He was old and he was coming of days. I mean, okay, we get it. He was old, which means he had a lot of days. Why do you have to repeat yourself? And it becomes even more problematic because last week in the Torah portion of Vayera, the verse literally says last week, Avram v'Sara skenim boim bayomim. Abraham and Sarah were old. They were coming of days. That was 40 years before we're talking about now. Over there, when it says they were getting old, it was before Isaac was born, which means Abraham was between 99 and 100 years old. Over here, Isaac's already getting married, right? Because he's sending Eliezer to find a wife for Isaac. And how old was Isaac when he got married? He was 40 years old. So there's a 40-year gap. A 40-year gap. And now we're repeating that he's getting old and coming of age. We already said that 40 years ago. So what is the Torah trying to tell us here? So we have two things we really need to understand. Number one,
So this is 35 years later.
40 years later. Number one, why the double language, getting old and coming of age, and coming of days? And number two, more importantly, 40 years ago in last week's Torah portion, you already told us that they were getting old. What are you telling me again that they're getting? How many times can they get old? Now, the Ibn Ezra, the great Spanish commentator on the Torah, the Ibn Ezra says that Ba Bayomim means that it was super old. First of all, How do you reconcile that with last week? When were they super old? Last week or this week? 40 years ago at 100 or 40? Or at 140? And number two,
Is it written the same in Hebrew?
over there it's plural because it's Abraham and Sarah. And over here it's in the singular because it's just Abraham, but it's the same words. Baba Yamim, Skanim, and Zakim, same thing. So number one, how do you reconcile that? Number two, more importantly, by King David HaMelech in the book of Kings, when he was close to 70 years old and close to his passing, it says that he was Zakin and Baba Yamim. He was old and coming of age, and he was only barely 70. So it can't mean that whenever Ezra says that it means he was super old, how are you going to reconcile with the fact that King David, it says the same language, and he was not super old. So obviously it means something very different. Now in the Medrash, right, before I get to the Rebbe's teaching, by the way, what I'm going to share with you from the Rebbe tonight is from Fabrengen in the fall of 1982. Just before my first birthday. I was born in December of 81. This was in November of 82. But before we get to the Rebbe's unique novel interpretation, there's the Medrash. So the Medrash tries to reconcile it and say that after Abraham gave birth, but after Abraham and Sarah had Isaac, they became youthful again because they had a new baby. Right? So the next 40 years, it was like Abraham became youthful, and then he started getting old again. So 40 years later, the Torah tells us, by the way, he became old again. Okay, but there's a problem with that. What's the problem with that? From a very straightforward standpoint of the Torah. Later, right, in the end of our parsha, it talks about Abraham having more kids with Keturah. Right? At the end of our Torah portion, if you open up if you open up to page 139, Abraham took another wife. Her name was Keturah, also known as Hagar. She bore him Zimran and Yaksha, Medan, Midyan, Yishbak, Shua. He had a whole team of them. And he sent them, by the way, it says he sent them to the land of the east, which we spoke about in a previous class a few years ago, that many interpretations are that he gave them the gifts of magic, the gifts of the occult, and he sent them to the east, which is to Asia, to the place where the occult really took off. So we always think that Abraham had Isaac and Ishmael, Arabs and Jews, but really he had Arabs and Jews, and the Asians were gifts from him. But either way, he had children much later. So if the Medrash is correct, that when he had Isaac, he became youthful again, and then he started getting older again, how are you going to explain that later, after he's old again, he's having more children?
Something got old again after.
No, this is it. So if he got old over here, what does that even mean that later he has more children? That's first of all. The other interpretation in the Medrash is that he lost his vigor. You know, you can tell when a person's withering out, they're not the same anymore. You ever go to a nursing home, and if you do this as a rabbi, you go a lot, you can tell when you start losing, when you see a person and they're a shell of a person because they're losing their life, they're losing their lebedekeit. They're still alive, they still exist, but they're losing that. So the Medrash tries to say that over here, where he gets super duper old, where he's 140, he lost some of that vigor. Okay, if that's what the Medrash, if that's what the understanding is, then why use the exact same term you used when he was 100, that when he was 140? You should use different terms to indicate that he was old and that he was so old that he had no vigor. In other words, the Rebbe is a practical student of Rashi and of the Torah. The Rebbe says, you cannot just, the Medrash has a cute idea. Okay, but we have to reconcile it with the facts on the ground. He was old when he turned 100. You're telling me he's old again when he's 140. You're trying to tell me that it's a language about super old, which doesn't reconcile with the fact that he has more children later, and you're using the same language for old and super old. So which is it?
It has to be something different.
It has to be something. The Rebbe goes from one commentary to the next, from one medrash to the next, proving that we need something deeper here, because otherwise seklepnish. You know what it means in Yiddish, seklepnish? It doesn't glue together. Something doesn't make sense here. Seklepnish. It doesn't click. It doesn't make sense. So the Rebbe goes on to this most beautiful life lesson that is vital to both young people and older people. And it's a perspective on life. It's a perspective on the utilization. How do we utilize our life that we're gifted? And how we see it through the lens of Abraham, and originally Abraham and Sarah, but Abraham in all stages of his life. And what the Rebbe says is as follows. When you say zaken, which means old, that's a passport thing. What's the age in the books? How old are you? Are you 27, 62, check the door, 53? How old are you? It's a numbers thing. But when you say Baba Yamim, the coming of days, it's the quality of the life that you are living. Not the quantity of years, but the quality of life. I've shared with you many times, and I apologize to Chagai and Margot, to Seth for saying it again, but it's a good word from Manas Friedman, Rabbi Manas Friedman, that there's living and there's existing. And you could exist and not be alive. And unfortunately, many people are like that. So Zaken is the age of the person, the quantity of their life, and Baba Yamim, coming of days, is the quality of their life. So when you say Zaken, it means someone that lived many years, but we don't know how those years affected you. Could be they affected you very little. You just floated through life. You didn't do much in your life, so you weren't affected very much by life. And there are people that are very old, and when you look at them, they look so young because they didn't really have that many tough or challenging experiences in their life, so they look youthful. Right? We assume that people that look young is because they worked out a lot. Sometimes you look young because you did nothing in your life. You never had stress. You never had stress. You never had challenges. You never had issues. I'm a chayil. You have old age, but there's no telling that you're coming of age because the quality of your life was not impactful. You didn't do much, which means it didn't affect you much. So you floated through life. But then there's Baba Yamim. Then there's a life that is coming of days. Not only did you manage to pass a bunch of decades, but also you were Baba Yamim. You were immersed in those days. You lived those days, and every day, every hour had activities and things that left an incredible impact on you. That's why, by the way, by King David, he was only almost 70, and it says Baba Yamim, because think of King David's life. Wars and sorrow from his own family, from Avshalom, from Adoniyahu, the episode of Bathsheba, his own kids trying to kill him, this one's trying to usurp his power, Achitophel, his private advisor, is a traitor. It's a disaster zone. So of course, by the time he was 70, he wasn't only Zaken, he wasn't only old in numbers, he was Baba Yamim. Every day, every hour impacted him to the point that you could tell that the quality of his life was very much there. He lived a full, immersed life that affected him in every way possible and left, in his case, probably an effect of old age on him. Now we can understand why 40 years ago, when Abraham was just 100, and him and Sarah was 90, Abraham was 100, and they were giving birth to their first son, Isaac Yitzchak, it says, Avram Zaki Baba Yamim. Why? Because naturally, according to the laws of nature, when a person gets older, the items that affect them become less and less. People tend to chill out when they get older. They retire. They sit at a pool all day. They stare at the ceiling all day. They watch TV. They play mahjong. They play bingo, mezitzte, mekukte, meklapte. They spend the shuffleboard. They look. So you automatically, so let's say you make it to 70 and then the rest of your life you're doing shuffleboard. So it's pretty chilled, which means however you looked at 70, there's a good chance you're going to look that way at 80, because what's going to affect you? What's going to stress you out? What do you got to lose? You're going to get stressed out about the news? What's going to stress out? I made it to 70. I lived through this war and that war. So you think another war is going to have an effect on me? It has a tendency that when you get to a certain age, the impact of life's activities, because life has taken sort of a back seat, you're sort of way more chilled and relaxed. Unless, of course, you're Jewish and then you're never relaxed. You're always anxious and always stressed, but regular people. So then it makes sense that Abraham and Sarah, when they turned 100, they got old, and you could see it on them. They went through a lot with Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah and Hagar and infertility and dealing with pagan world and Nimrod and what a world from an Ishmael today, the world they lived through. So it made sense when they were 190, when Abraham was 100 and Sarah was 90, you could see the impact of their quality of life on them. But if you fast forward 40 years, normally you would expect that if you're an Abraham from 100 to 140, he should have had a pretty chilled life. I think I just heard a door close.
I just heard it.
Hello?
Hello?
It's 2023. When we hear noises, we get serious. Five, 4, 3. Is everything okay? Hello? Seth? Did we lose anyone? Did you see? Oy vey. No, okay, everyone's good. Baruch Hashem. So you would think that 40 years later,
Do you think he went outside?
is Mendy not on the couch?
You didn't see him slide through.
Okay, don't worry about it. We're live. We'll worry about it later.
Yeah.
So if Abraham at 100 already was old and coming of age, you'd think, okay, the next 40 years, what could happen? Sarah passed away. Kind of sort of he'll chill. But the truth is that no, that because 40 years had passed, and those 40 years, you think Abraham had it easy, he didn't. There was things that left a big impact on him. Actually, in those 40 years, Isaac was born. He took Isaac to the Akedah, Yitzchak to the Akedah, Sarah passed away. So there were so many new things that happened in those 40 years that, of course, when he turned 140, the Torah says, you know what, I have a secret to tell you. You would think that Abraham already aged and reached his peak at 100, and he's not getting any older, and you're not going to see any more of the impact of life's activities and life's episodes and life's challenges and stresses on him. He says, no. Va'avram zakim baba yomim. Even though 40 years ago, he already got old, he's getting old again.
So this Isaac is the second chapter, and the second chapter rejuvenated him to.
Well, the Medrash said that the Medrash said it rejuvenated him, but that makes no sense because it maybe rejuvenated him with joy, but in his life activities, there was a lot of reasons for stress in those next 40 years, which is exactly why 40 years later, it doesn't mean that he wasn't youthful anymore, because we already said that he had more children later. Yeah. So it wasn't about his vigor. It was about the reality that in his life, you can tell that he wasn't asleep at the wheel, that his life continued to be productive. And by definition, if your life is productive, it has challenges and stresses. And if you're in service of your creator, if you're like Abraham was, if you're in service of God, of course you're going to have challenges later. That's part of the gig. And those challenges will affect you negatively or could affect you negatively. And so, therefore, there's 2 times in the Torah, once last week and once this week, where we're told that Abraham became old, because it's reminding us that at every stage in Abraham's life, he was living so immersed, so devoted to his life's purpose, and therefore so active that automatically, if you're that active, the effects of life that it has on you, the quality of your life is affected by it, and you could see it on his physical being. And this actually fits perfectly with the Zohar, because the Zohar, the foundation of Jewish mysticism, says, Baba Yomim, right, that he came of days, that he was coming of days, when it talks about him getting old, that Abraham's entire life, every day of his life was filled it was complete, was wholesome in his service of God. Well, how does that reconcile with what we just said? Actually reconciles perfectly. He didn't live life on vacation. Abraham never chilled. Could you please see what's going on? Many. Abraham never chilled. And if he never chilled, which means he was always in service of his creator, he was always seeking to impact the world and make it a better place. He was always seeking to be there as a family man. He was always seeing himself as a person to fight the paganism and bring monotheism to the world. And therefore, 100 he was old, and 100 he was already, you could tell that he had a life full of stresses. But guess what? At 140, the Torah says it again, because the next 40 years of his life, from 100 to 140, even though he was still capable of bringing new children to the world, and he was still capable of being an impact, but it was also impacting him because he never took a break from recognizing that he's in service of God. And actually his wife, Sarah was very much the same. If you remember the beginning of this week's Torah portion, it says, right in the beginning, on page 123, it says Sarah's lifetime was a total of 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years, right? She lived 127 years. But it doesn't say 127. It says 100, 20, and 7. The years of Sarah's life were all equally good, right? All equally good.
All the 100 and the 20.
Yeah, so why does it want to, it says 120 and 7, to teach us that she was, at 20, Sarah was beautiful as at 7, as 100, she was as free from sin as someone who's 20. But it's more than that. The last words over there, the years of Sarah's life were all equally good. What does that mean? She didn't have challenges. The woman was infertile till she was 90. She had a nephew named Lot. She had a husband who was busy changing the world and bringing Arabs to eat dinner in their house. She had a husband who was thrown to a fiery furnace. Her and her husband were told to pack up and go to a land that God will tell them where to go. It didn't tell them where. You figure out, just follow orders. And then she ends her life finding out that her son was taken up to Mount Moriah to be sacrificed on the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. So what does it mean that all her life, the years of Sarah's life were all equally good? It means that when you're a righteous person, when you're a good person, you live your life every day, no matter what's going on, no matter how much challenge, how many challenges or stresses there are, you live every day with meaning and focus. Because you're in service of Hashem. You're in service of God. You're in service of humanity, which as part of God's mission to us, we serve humanity and seek to bring goodness and holiness to the world. And therefore, no matter what was going on in Sarah's life or Abraham's life, they were living their life with meaning, impactfully. And therefore, it affected them. You didn't just see someone who's 82 skiing down Bridger because they're all chilled and they have no stresses, because their kid graduated college and they have a retirement fund for the next 2,000 years with enough money, and because they have a perfect car with snow tires and their life is perfect. What are they stressing about? No stress. Abraham and Sarah had stress because they were Jewish, and when you're a Jew with mission, and there's pagans that don't like you and want to kill you and want to throw you in fires, and you have children that God tells you to bring on the Akedah, and you're infertile, and you're dealing with a son named Ishmael, and there's so much going on in your life, and you have a nephew, Lot, who's totally off his rocker. You're stressed, and because you're stressed, doesn't mean you get a freebie that you don't get to serve God. You still serve God. So therefore, when you get old, do you get old? You get old, and it's coming of days. We're going to see on you that you're getting old. You're not just going to be in your passport old. You're going to be tzeklopt, but tzeklopt with a purpose, beaten with a purpose, tired because of purpose, restless because of purpose, sweat, toil, and blood to be in service of our Creator, to be in service of humanity, not to be asleep at the wheel. The world has enough people existing that are not living. People that breathe oxygen free of charge, and they do nothing to promote goodness and holiness in the world. And then there's the Abrahams and the Sarahs and their descendants, who despite the stresses, and despite the threats, and despite the Hamases and the Nazis and the Inquisition, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Byzantines, the Ottomans, every Saini Yisrael, every Jew hater that ever existed, the UN, the EU, the US, all of them, we're still standing as a bright light. We're still standing and living our lives meaningfully. Jews every day wake up and daven, and every afternoon they daven, and every night they daven. And we still learn our shiurim, our daily study of Chumash and of Tanya, of Jewish mysticism. And we say our Psalms, and we learn our Rambam, and we learn Daf Yomi, we learn our page of Talmud. Yes, even when we're mourning, even when we're stressed, even when we're challenged, even when people are screaming, from the river to the sea, right? All these freebies that never worked today, from the river to the sea, the Talmud is going to rock and roll. Doesn't rhyme. That's why I can't scream it in the street. From the river to the sea, Am Yisrael Chai. Not because we have Chai necklaces and because we have big Israeli flags, but Am Yisrael Chai because we follow Abraham and Sarah. And Abraham and Sarah taught us that, sure, it takes a toll on us. It takes a physical toll on us. When you live an impactful, meaningful life, it's going to take a toll on you. But what do you want to be? Freeloader? I'm in God's world, getting free oxygen, free food, free water, and I'm all good to go because I have a retirement fund or I have a trust fund, and whoopee-doo-dah. Therefore what? Therefore you should be a loser? Or should you stress it because you know that living life meaningfully and living life impactfully and living life with purpose and living life with every faculty of your soul, with all the 10 faculties of your soul, from Chachma all the way down to Malchus, like we discussed in July, every part of your being is purpose. Okay, I davened, and I prayed to my God, I connected with God. And then 7 hours later, I came from Mincha to do it again. And an hour later, I came from Ma'ariv to do it again. And before I went to sleep, I connected with him again before I went to sleep with Krishma Shalamita. When I wake up in the morning, I say Moeda'ani. And I wash my hands with Negelwasser, Netilat Yadayim, and I get up with vigor. I am tired. I am stressed. It's challenging. It's sometimes so hard to live impactfully and be focused when there's so much distraction. Abraham and Sarah tell us how to do it. When you're 100, you're getting old. You're coming of days. Guess what? When you're 140, you're coming of days again. When you felt old when you were 45, and you thought, oh, how am I going to do this? I feel so old and cranky. My body is so impacted by everything I've been through. And then at 65, you're doing it again. And at 75 again, and mishlafnish. You don't get to chill out. Whoever came up with that ridiculous term. We don't get to relax or chillax or retire or sit on the beach chair at the pool for 8 hours a day, turning into a shriveled little raisin. Sitzt, the ganzen Tag is laying over there. Hello? God gave you oxygen. God gave you a life again today, so you should turn into a raisin laying over there staring at the ceiling. Could you go do something positive? You think Abraham didn't want to retire at some point? I'm sure he did. I'm sure Abraham was 140. Like, okay, time to check out. No, you know what he did at 140? He went to have more kids. Sent them to Asia as a gift. Well, it's not about the kids. It's about the fact that he was being productive. He saw purpose. He saw meaning. He saw a reason not just to exist, but to live. And that's what the Zohar teaches us about Abraham and Sarah. They didn't live perfect lives stress-free. Quite the contrary. They had more stress than any of us could imagine. But they lived impactfully, wholesomely. It doesn't mean you can never take a break. But even when you take a break, you're a Jew with a mission. What do you mean a break? A break from what? There's no break from God, right? You went to Oro Valley. You went to look at the shul. That's what a Jew does. So what if I'm away on a trip? That means I don't go to shul? Of course I go to shul. It's Shabbos. What do you mean? How can I not go to shul? But I'm on vacation. A vacation from what? From living? Imagine someone says, take a vacation from oxygen. You can't, right? You die. A fish on Wasser. Right? A fish without water. For us, for a Jew, living purposefully, living meaningfully, is like a fish in water. That's our life. This is our life in the length of our days. Abraham and Sarah epitomized that. They embodied that. So I don't know that we each can live literally like Abraham and Sarah, because if we could, then they wouldn't be so impressive. But the actions of our forefathers are a lesson for us, for their children. And it's a lesson for us of how we need to see life. Life isn't a system where you float through. Well, I only got 12 years to go. I mean, my mother lived till 90, and so I'm 81, and so maybe 90. I don't know. I have good genes. You ever hear these conversations? And they hello, what are you talking about? You're calculating your death? Right now, you're alive. What are you calculating your death? Why is that relevant? Right now, you're alive. Get busy. Be productive. Be a voice of reason, a voice of holiness, a voice of wholesomeness, a voice of sanity. Be a mentor to younger people. Teach them the values of Judaism, the mitzvahs of the Torah, the traditions of our faith. Teach them history so they won't be ignoramuses going around from the river Tennessee without any knowledge, like a Mamash a cup they have, right? If we don't train them, who's going to train them? If the elders are busy turning into raisins in Cancun. We sits in Cancun, Cabo. They lay a whole day. I read a book. What did you do today? I read a book. Read a book? Go to your neighbor next door. Okay, I understand. You don't want to change the world. Go bring with your neighbor. Maybe they're a little older than you and they need some more love. Go cook them a meal. Go do Bikr Cholim. Go visit the sick. Go do Achnasas Kala. Go help a young woman who's an orphan and needs help getting married. Go help someone that needs help. If you become a Chevra Kadisha member, go help bury the dead. There's so much good to do in the world. Don't retire from life and become an existing raisin. Abraham and Sarah say, thou shalt not be a raisin. Thou shalt be a living being, not just existing, but living. Wake up in the morning and don't check the news right away and then give assessments on the news, then become a pundit from the news, then send the news to 18 people. Enough of the news. How about you make the news? How do you make the news? Do something good. There's still a few channels that might report something good. If not, send it to me. I'll send it to you. I'll make it sound like my dad. What can I do? Now you know that I'm his son. So that's our message for tonight. Bubalach, my dear loved ones, my dear devoted students, on this beautiful fall evening. Don't be a loser. Don't be an existing oxygen consumer that doesn't do anything for the world besides consume oxygen for free. Don't be a waste of furniture. When God sees you, they should see someone who wakes up every day and is living life, making an impact, a positive impact. And there's so many different ways to make a positive impact. And it starts from within. To see yourself as a human being capable of making that impact, capable of bringing meaning to the world, until we merit a time when we will all be living by default with meaning. When it says that everyone will go up to the mountain of God and seek God, the temple in Jerusalem, the temple that the Jews invented. I'm joking. The temple in Jerusalem that started with Adam and then later with Noah and Abraham, and of course the temple built by Solomon and the temple built by Ezra and Nehemiah. But Olu Maishi and Baratzi and Lishbedis Aresav. We will go up to Mount Zion and we'll judge the Esau's that try to hurt us during the exile. And that day, God will be reign as king all over the whole world. He'll be seen, right? On that day, God will be wholesome and his name will be wholesome. Will be a world revealed with godliness. Keep rocking, keep living, stop existing. And Bezrat Hashem, we'll see you back in next week. Sei gesund. Be inspired, be uplifted, and make it a great night. Sei gesund.